Story 1. The Figure in the Basement. When I was 9, I lived with my dad and younger brother in a small, weathered house in a quiet, rural town. The streets were safe enough for kids to play kickball in the summer, but our house always felt strange. Dad said it was just old, that creaky floors and odd sounds were normal. But the things I heard, especially at night, didn't feel like the house settling. They felt alive, like something was moving just out of sight. One sleepless night I lay in my small bedroom, clutching my blanket and staring at the cracked ceiling. My room was simple: a bed, a wooden chair, and a small bookshelf by the window. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting shadows of the oak tree outside. I tried to focus on those shadows to calm myself, but one shadow near the corner by my bookshelf didn't move like the others. It was low to the ground, hunched, like a person crouching. I thought it might be my jacket draped over the chair, but when I blinked, it vanished. A cold shiver ran through me, not from the air, but from deep inside. Like my body knew something my mind didn't. I hid under the blanket and eventually drifted off. The next morning, I noticed my bookshelf was slightly ajar, like someone had pulled it away from the wall. Books were scattered on the floor, ones I hadn't touched in weeks. I always kept my room tidy because Dad would get mad if it wasn't. I pushed the shelf back and didn't tell anyone. A few weeks later, my brother, who was 6, mentioned at dinner that he didn't like the lady in the basement. He said it so matter-of-factly that I froze mid-bite. Dad laughed it off, saying kids have wild imaginations, but my brother's eyes were serious. He said she stood by the basement door at night, humming softly, like she was trying to sing but couldn't remember the tune. Dad tucked him in that night and said a prayer, but he didn't check the basement. That same night, I woke to a scraping sound, like someone dragging a heavy sack across the floor. It came from the hallway right outside my door. I lay still, too scared to look, convinced that if I peeked, I'd see something staring back. The sound stopped right by my bed, and I held my breath until I passed out from fear. In the morning, I found faint scratches on the hallway floorboards like claw marks. I showed Dad, but he got upset, saying I must have dragged something heavy or played too rough. I swore I hadn't, but he didn't believe me. The nights grew worse. I started hearing faint humming like a lullaby coming from the basement stairs. Sometimes my brother would wake up crying, pointing at the hallway and saying, "She's there again." I never saw her, but I felt her, a prickling on my skin like eyes watching from the dark. The worst night came in late winter during a snowstorm. I woke to find my bedroom door ajar, though I always closed it. The hallway light, which Dad left on for us, flickered and went out. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming up the basement stairs. They stopped outside my door. I wanted to yell for Dad, but my voice caught in my throat. The door creaked, and a tall, thin shape leaned into the room, just a silhouette against the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut, pretending to sleep. When I opened them, the door was closed and the hallway light was back on. In the morning, I asked Dad if he'd checked on me. He said he'd been asleep all night. My brother said he saw the lady by his bed humming. We told Dad together, and for the first time, he looked shaken. He burned sage in every room and said a prayer, and things quieted for a bit. But one day, when I got home from school early, I heard the basement door slam shut. I was alone. I crept to the hallway and saw the door slightly open with muddy footprints leading down the stairs. I waited outside until Dad got home. He said it was probably the wind, but I could tell he was uneasy. Years later, after we moved, I asked Dad if he ever felt anything in that house. He paused, then admitted he'd seen a figure once, a woman in a long dress standing at the basement door. He never told us because he didn't want to scare us, but he thought she might have lived there long ago. Even now as an adult, I get a knot in my stomach thinking about it. Sometimes, when it's quiet at night, I swear I hear that faint humming, like she's still there, waiting. Story 2. The boy in the window at 10. My family moved to a newer house in a suburban neighborhood after my mom remarried. It was bigger, with tall trees and a wide lawn, and I thought it'd be a great place to grow up. My room was on the second floor, with a large window overlooking the backyard, and a wardrobe that took up half a wall. At first everything felt perfect, but soon small things made the house feel wrong. One night, I woke to a soft tapping, like fingers on glass coming from my window. I thought it was rain, but the sky was clear. I stared at the window and the tapping stopped, only to start again minutes later. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a loose shutter, but when I checked the next morning, the window was slightly unlatched, though I'd locked it before bed. I asked my stepdad if he'd opened it, and he said no, suggesting the latch was faulty. I knew better. The tapping continued most nights, always stopping when I hid under my blanket. One night I worked up the courage to look. Pressed against the window was a pale face, a boy, maybe my age, with hollow eyes and a wide, unnatural grin. He was outside, but my room was on the second floor with no ledge or tree to climb. His hand tapped the glass slowly, deliberately. I ducked under the covers, heart racing, and didn't sleep. I told my mom the next day, and she laughed, saying I must have been half asleep. My stepdad rolled his eyes, but I noticed he started double-checking the locks at night. A month later, my little sister, who was 5, started talking about the smiling boy who watched her from her window. She said he'd stand outside grinning and sometimes whisper her name. Mom thought she was copying me, but I saw the fear in her eyes. One night I heard her scream. I ran to her room and found her hiding under her bed, sobbing. She said the boy was at her window, pointing at her. I looked, but the window was empty. Still, I believed her. The dreams started soon after. In them, the boy stood in my room, grinning, his voice raspy as he whispered my name. I'd wake up, and the wardrobe door would be open, though I'd closed it. The worst night was during a thunderstorm. I woke to the window rattling, the lock twisting on its own. The window slid open, and the boy climbed in, his movements jerky like a puppet. He drifted toward my bed, his grin never fading, and leaned close, his breath cold and stale. I screamed, and my parents rushed in. The window was shut, locked tight, but they looked worried. They sent me to a counselor, saying it was night terrors, but I knew it wasn't. We stayed in that house for 2 more years. My sister stopped mentioning the boy, but I'd hear her whispering, "Go away," at night. Even now I avoid looking out windows after dark, afraid I'll see that grin again. The memory lingers, and during storms, I still feel that cold breath on my face. Story 3. The girl on the path when I was 8. I lived in a cozy neighborhood with narrow streets and old maple trees. After school, I'd ride my scooter, memorizing every bump in the pavement. There was a house at the end of the street, a small cottage with a gravel path leading to the backyard. Most afternoons, a young girl, maybe 12, stood on that path wearing a faded blue dress. She'd wave and call out, "Nice scooter," or ask about my day. I'd wave back, staying on my side of the street because my grandma, who raised me, said not to cross without her. The girl was friendly, always knowing little things about me, like how I'd gotten a new scooter or that I loved comic books. I thought she was just observant, maybe saw me around. We'd talk from across the street, her telling me about a squirrel she saw or a game she played in the yard. One day, she asked if I wanted to race her to the corner. I said no, knowing Grandma would be mad. She giggled and said, "Someday." Then she stopped showing up. For a week, the path was empty, the cottage's windows dark. Curious, I crossed the street one day and knocked on the door. An older man answered, looking confused. I described the girl, and he said it sounded like his daughter Lily, but she died 3 years ago in an accident. He showed me a photo, a girl in a blue dress smiling brightly. My chest tightened. It was her, but her smile in the photo had a small gap in her teeth, something I'd never noticed on the girl I saw. That night, I woke to my name being whispered outside my window, in her voice. I peeked out and saw a figure on the street in a blue dress waving slowly. I hid under my blanket, shaking until morning. I told Grandma, who checked outside but found nothing. She said it was a dream, but I stopped riding past that house. Years later, I passed the cottage again. The path was overgrown, the house empty. I didn't stop, but I still hear her voice sometimes, calling my name, and I wonder who I was really talking to.